it's more than just communication, but when you think about leadership, so much of leadership is communication. It's the ability to communicate to your staff, communicate to your peers, to your boss, and so on. And so you will actually be taking a short assessment tonight to find out what that is, and then we can talk about what the different styles are. But I want to start by asking you if you've ever had the following experience. How many of you have ever, been in your organization or at school, stopped and had a conversation with someone, could be talking to that person for 5 or 10 minutes, and when you walk away, this is what you think. Anybody ever have that experience? I would say daily. This happens all the time. Why? What happens here? We're talking, this could be someone we know, a topic we're familiar with, and yet we walk away realizing that we are just not on the same page. What causes it? What's been your experience?
Different communication styles.
Yeah, that sometimes we could be talking about the same thing, but because we're coming at it from a very different perspective and a very different style, it's like we're talking two different languages. It's like we're talking to an alien. And so a lot of this is, if we can think about the fact that, darn it, not everybody is just like us. If everybody was, the world might be a simpler place. But because people have different styles and perspectives, we sometimes are talking and we're like this. I do a lot of workshops around communication, and I found this statistic a few years ago. It says social psychologists estimate that there's a 40 to 60% loss of meaning in the transmission of messages from sender to receiver. Essentially, what that says is half of what we communicate gets lost in translation. I don't know about you, that's kind of scary to me. When you think about all the communication, all the information that we have to communicate on a daily basis, whether, again, how many of you work full-time in addition to going to school? So, in your jobs, with your customers, your clients, your coworkers, your boss, people who work for you, if half of that is getting lost, there's an awful lot of communication breakdowns happening. And believe me, a lot goes into this. We could brainstorm a whole list of obstacles that add to this number. But communication styles is a part of that, is a big part of it. Again, if we're not speaking the same language, then we're going to have this kind of breakdown. So the goal here is to improve this number so that we're not losing half of what we try to communicate. So as I mentioned, one factor that significantly affects communication effectiveness is the style. And again, I'm going to say that this is broader than just communication style, even though that's what the assessment is called. Really talking about the personality and value orientation of people at either end. And again, we're going to put this in the context of leadership in a moment, but if we're thinking about the leader who's trying to communicate to his or her team, and his or her style is very different than his or her personality or value orientation is very different than the team's, there's going to be a breakdown there. When people with different communication styles interact, there's always the potential for problems in communication, for those kind of breakdowns. So what do I mean by communication style? Again, it's broader, I think, than just communication. I call it the 3 Ps. It's our personality. How many of you have seen personality conflicts at school or at work that have kind of gotten in the way of people being able to work effectively together? Our priorities, if I value or if I prioritize action and your priority is analysis, we're going to butt heads. We're not going to be talking about the same thing. And the last one is what I'm going to call preferences. So I want you to do something for me now, if you wouldn't mind, and that is fold your arms. If everybody would fold your arms. And now what I'd like you to do is unfold them and refold them the opposite way. Most of you got there. Tell me about the 2 experiences. How did it feel the first time when I said fold your arms? Natural. Comfortable. Did you have to think about it? Was it automatic? How did it feel the second time? Awkward. Some of you, I can see the wheels grinding for some of you as you're trying, because it's hard, right? We're trying to figure, okay, I put this here, that there. That's what we mean by preferences, that when we communicate as leaders or coworkers or whatever our role is, we tend to fall back on ways of communicating that are comfortable for us. Like the first time when I said fold your arms, don't even think about it, it's automatic. Doesn't mean we can't communicate in other ways. Everybody in the room was able to unfold and refold the opposite way. It took some of you a little longer than others, but you all got there. It's the same with how we interact and communicate with others, and that is we have to think about it. It may not feel as comfortable, but we can get there if we're trying to adapt and be flexible so that we can be more effective with more people in more situations. It's all about getting out of your comfort zone and not reacting. To me, reacting is something we do automatically. We don't think about it. We want to no longer react, we want to respond. And response means I'm going to think about it, put some thought into it, and decide what the best approach is. So let me give you an example of differing preferences here. So we've got Joe on the left. Joe says, I like to work methodically and thoroughly, exploring all alternatives. Jane, however, says, I like to work at a fast pace, act decisively, and get on with it. What happens if Jane is Joe's boss? Jane's the leader. And that's her philosophy and this is his. What happens when they have to work together, work on a project?
She feels it's too slow.
Yeah.
Too slow. Things aren't getting done.
Yeah, and so let's take it one step. So she feels things are too slow, aren't getting done. How's she feeling?
Frustrated.
Impatient, frustrated. Like, come on, get on with it. Let's just make a decision and move on. How's he feeling?
Rushed.
Rushed?
Pretty stressed.
Pretty stressed, pressured, because that's not the way he likes to work. And so if I'm the leader of either of these two individuals and my style is different, I will be a better leader if I take that into consideration and change how I communicate with them so that we're not like this. You know, we're not the, what planet is this? They're both saying about each other, what the heck planet is this person on? But if they understood each other's priorities and style and personality, they might be able to communicate more effectively. If we understand these interpersonal styles, communication styles, we can anticipate certain behaviors and make allowances for them. I can plan ahead. If I'm Jane, I'm the boss, and I know that my style is, you know, just go, 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 make a decision and move on. And I know I'm going to be interacting with Joe, who's more slow, methodical, analytical. I can plan for that. I can anticipate certain behaviors. I can plan my own approach and hopefully avoid potentially negative behaviors and a negative outcome to that decision or that conversation. So I'm going to hand out in a moment, I do have extra pens if anybody needs it, this communication styles assessment. Let me tell you a little bit about it. This was, and there are many others, by the way, out there. Myers-Briggs, any of you ever do MBTI? I actually use Myers-Briggs as well. DISC is another one that's very popular. There's so many of them. I started using this actually probably about 10 years ago. It was produced by the World Bank, of all places, and I have no idea why they developed it, but they have a very generous copyright that basically says as long as you're not selling it, as long as you're using it for educational or research purposes, you can reuse it and reproduce it. So what I like about it is, those of you who know Myers-Briggs, there's 16 different types. It's somewhat complex. In this particular model, there are 4 styles. So it's a little bit easier to digest, grasp, somewhat similar to DISC, those of you that know it. And it has pretty good results. I've done this probably now with thousands of people, and I usually get the response that this is pretty good at figuring out who I am. So let me hand it out, and then before you begin, let me go over instructions. And again, if anybody needs something to write with, I've got that. But just take one if you would and pass on. Give you one here. I think I give you 2 there. There we go. Get past those around. Anyone need a pen? Nope, looks like this is a HR crowd. We bring writing implements with us. All right, so let me describe this briefly, and then you can begin. So what you're going to find, this is, by the way, double-sided, so make sure you don't forget the back side. You're going to find 40 sets of paired statements. What I'm going to ask you to do is read each pair and select the one that is most typical of your personality. The difference between this and Myers-Briggs is Myers-Briggs, the pairs are related. In this assessment, they are completely unrelated, and that's by design. So here's the 2 complaints I get. Number 1, neither one of them is like me. Pick the lesser of 2 evils, because if you leave too many blank, you're not going to get an accurate result. Other complaint I get is both of them are like me. Pick the one that is more like you than the other. While you're doing that, I'm going to come around and hand out the scoring sheet, because when you're finished selecting one from each pair, you're going to transfer those selections to the scoring sheet so we can figure out what your results are. So any questions before we begin? Don't ponder. This is not meant to be a deep thinking exercise. Just answer spontaneously and you'll do well. Any questions? All right, you can start and I'll get the scoring sheets out. Thank you. Once you're done, let me just jump in here. Whatever numbers you circled on the assessment, go ahead and transfer those circles to the scoring sheet. So you're basically just taking what you selected on the double-sided page and transferring them to the scoring page. Test of your hand-eye coordination, by the way, to find the numbers on the scoring page. The last step is to add up the number of circles in each of the 4 categories that you see on the scoring page and enter the totals on the right-hand side on the lines. Anybody still working, or is everybody's finished? All right, so before we talk about results, I do want to talk a little bit about the scoring page. How many of you had some point total in all 4 styles, even if it was only 1 point in some of them? How would you interpret that? I mean, we're obviously here trying to find out what your preferred style is. What does it mean that all of you had some points in all 4 styles?
Different situations
situations could require different ways of communicating?
Absolutely, yeah. So what it tells me is all of you have some flexibility in your communication style, that you're using all four. But what we're really trying to find is most of us tend to fall back on one as our preferred, again, the folded arms. And so your highest point total of the four represents your preferred style. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to put a slide up on the screen that I don't have for you, but I do have much more detailed information that I'm going to hand out to everyone about all four of the styles. But let's look at the overview first. So this is a sample. I just wanted to share this with you. So in this particular case, this person's scores were 11, 9, 14, and 6. And obviously 14, the people style, style 3, was the highest. And so this is that person's preferred style. So that's what we're looking at. So here's the overview. And again, you'll have much more information than this. If your highest point total was in style 1, you are the action-oriented communicator or leader. When we communicate as leaders, if we're in this style, we tend to focus on things like results, achieving, doing, making decisions. Jane, in our example earlier, was action-oriented. Like, just do it, as Nike would say. Just get it done. The emphasis is always on moving on to the next thing. Anybody in the room have one as your preferred style? One person. One lone action person in the room. I like it. Style 2, if this was your highest, you have a process style of communication or leadership or interaction. Again, we can broaden it. People with this style tend to focus on organization, facts, details, analysis. Joe, in our example, was process, methodical, thorough, step-by-step, leave no stone unturned. We want to be sure we're thoroughly covering the issue. Simple way to describe it is process-oriented people like to organize things. Anybody who had style 2 as your highest? Style number 3 is the people style, and with this, people with this style tend to focus on relationships, teamwork, communication, making everybody happy, pleasing others, being sensitive to other people and their needs. Their priority is human relationships. How many of you had style 3? Not a surprise for an HR crowd. Obviously some careers tend to require some of these skills, and some of us tend to be attracted to careers that support our preferences. So for example, I used to do a lot of teaching for an organization that provides education to CPAs, Certified Public Accountants. Guess which box most of them fell in? 2, absolutely, yeah. And HR, we usually see in 3. And then the last style is style 4, and these are idea-oriented communicators. Their priorities are the new or novel. They tend to be more conceptual, more theoretical, big picture, more future-oriented, more creative, thinking outside the box, to use that cliche. They're the big picture thinkers. Anybody in the room have idea as? Great. Yeah. And again, in many groups, I tend to not see that one heavily represented, but often, again, in marketing types, scientists, people involved in research tend to be attracted or tend to have a preference for that style. So that's the big picture. Let me hand out more specific information for all of you. Take one and pass it along. And this gives you more adjectives, more words that describe each of the 4 styles. So what I would suggest is find your preferred style first and read that, but then I would ask you to look at the others as well, because it'll be helpful to see the contrast. Anybody tied, by the way, for 2? So what that tells me is you're using them interchangeably, and one of the things you may want to look at is, are there certain people or situations that you use one style with versus the other? Anybody tied for 3 or 4? This was an assessment that everybody took to find out their style. So feel free to, do you need a pen? You do have one? Yep. over here. There we go. That one slipped through the copy. Extras of the results? Yep, sure did. I didn't want that. They forgot about you back there. So how many of you, after reading the description of your preferred style or styles, as they're tied, think that it's a pretty accurate description of you? Show of hands. Again, why I keep coming back to it. It's short and sweet, but it's not bad. The third box, and I want you to get turned off by the third box that says, at times under stress for each of the styles. That is not meant to imply that that is you all of the time. But what often happens is when we're under stress or a lot of pressure, what I call the dark side of our style sometimes comes out. And so some of those adjectives may describe you when you're not your best self, when you're under a lot of pressure, under a lot of stress, and again, some of the more negative characteristics of the style come out. So you may look at that and say, 99% of these don't fit, but yeah, boy, am I that when I get stressed out. So that's what that's meant to do. All right. So some things to consider that in interpreting sort of where you are and what your own profile is, I usually remind people to look at these things. Number one, the first thing I look at is how close to 20 points is your preferred style. The maximum number of points you can have for any style is 20. The closer you are to 20, the stronger your preference for that style. 15 and up generally is a pretty strong preference. How many of you had 15 plus for your preferred style? So what that tells me is, and it's not a hard and fast rule, but this is about flexibility and about adjusting your style to be able to work effectively with others. The stronger your preference, the harder it may be for you to make those adjustments. Not impossible, but you may, just as you have to really think about refolding your arms the opposite way, you may have to think about it more and put more effort into it because you revert more automatically to your preferred style than someone with an 11 or a 10 for their top style. So that's one thing to think about. The second thing I look at is how big a gap do you have between your highest and your next highest. The smaller the gap, the more, again, you're using those styles almost interchangeably. So a couple of you were tied. How many of you had only a 1 or a 2 point gap between the top two? So again, that tells me that you may be weighing situations and using those styles pretty interchangeably depending on who you're with and what the situation is. The closer all four of them are, quite frankly, I've had people say to me, what's the ideal score? And I guess you could say theoretically the ideal score is 10s across the board. I've only seen that twice in the thousands of people I've done that with. So that's tough. But the closer they are, the more flexible you are in how you interact with others. And then the last thing I look at, which can be very enlightening, is the overall pattern. And so some of the patterns I've sometimes seen is 3 are very, very close, and the 4th one drops off the map. So you've got like 13, this is going to add up, 12, 11, 5. And I would pay close attention to the one that's very, very low, because what that tells me is if I'm a leader, and let's say I'm very low on idea, and I've got to interact with someone who's an idea style, who's really creative and thinks outside the box and loves to brainstorm, that may be a really tough exchange for me because I have such little preference, almost no preference for that particular style. Did anyone have one that was very low? Single digits, a couple of points, 2, 3, 4, 5. So again, pay attention to that, because that tells you that you may have to work a little harder in leading or communicating with people of that particular style. So let's talk. There are no right or wrongs here. There are no good styles or bad styles. The reality is Every single one of these has a contribution to make as a leader, as an employee, as a coworker, and so on. And so let's explore that a little bit. So I want to talk about the strengths of each style, and let's put it in the context of as a leader, and the potential trouble spots of each style as a leader. So let's start with action. What are the strengths that the action-oriented leader brings to his or her team, organization, company? What do they contribute? Energy, absolutely. Yep. What else?
They're very results driven and they get it done.
Yep, they get it done, results driven. What else?
Can keep things moving forward.
Yes, exactly. That kind of momentum, that drive, that keep it moving forward.
Influential.
Influential, yeah, absolutely. Yep. What's the dark side of the action leader? What are the trouble spots?
They may not always be new ideas.
Correct. Yeah. Why so? I think you're absolutely right. Why do you say that?
There's a little bit of sort of proactivity, if that's even a word.
Yes.
Sort of to stop and think that you don't get if you're going to go on.
Absolutely. Yep. And they sometimes fall back on the tried and true because, hey, it works. We tried it, it worked. Let's do it again. So absolutely right. What else? What other trouble spots? They can be very demanding. That energy and that drive that they bring to their own work, they bring to other people's work too, and that can come across as very, very demanding. Yeah, again, in that effort to just keep moving and tackle that next goal, they may lose sight of that. It's kind of what you said, they're not taking that step back to sort of think and survey and look strategically at things. So some potential things to be aware of. Again, so if I'm the action leader, I want to be sure that I'm focusing on the positive characteristics of my style and not getting caught in the trap of being seen as the dark side or the negative side of my style. How about process? What are the strengths the process leader brings? Well thought out, absolutely, yep.
Good attention to detail.
Definitely, yep.
You don't let emotions get in the way.
Yeah, they can be very sort of objective in how they view and not let emotions get in the way. What's the downside of that style as a leader?
You could be perceived as too cold.
Yes, too unemotional. There's that balance between, being objective and not emotional and being too unemotional. So yes, I agree.
I was going to say, sometimes they can get lost in the minutia.
They can. Too much detail, and they also can miss the big picture because they're, the old forest for the trees. Anything else? I'll throw it in. They can really grind things to a halt. They can slow things down. In certain situations, you need that slow, methodical, thorough approach. But if we've got a crisis or we've got an emergency, we need to act. Somebody needs to step up and say, fire in the room, everybody out. And sometimes that's hard for the process leader to get out of that detail mode and get into, we've got to take some action. How about the people style? What's the contribution? What's the strength of the people-oriented leader?
People want to do things and they have a voice. We were actually talking about that in the class tonight. So if you're a people person or people leader, you're probably using a lot of cross-functional collaboration.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
You have that built in. You don't really have to convince as much because everyone had a word in it.
Yep, good, absolutely. They tend to be collaborative. They tend to invite participation. Yep, definitely. What else? Contribution or strengths of the people leader, people style.
I guess they'll be sensitive to a group dynamic, so they'd be able to facilitate it better.
Exactly. Yep.
I feel like they can instill value.
Yeah, definitely. Downsides, dark side.
The results aren't in the forefront. The hard-hitting numbers.
Yeah.
Be lost.
Right? They tend to focus on the people side of tasks, but the reality is you need to focus on the task side of tasks balance too. Good leaders find that balance between task and people, and you're absolutely right that the people-oriented leader tends to, the balance goes this way on the people side. And so sometimes things don't get done because they're more concerned about the group dynamic and how people are feeling and so on. It can be tough sometimes for them to make the hard decision as well, because sometimes you have to make a hard decision that some people don't like and that isn't popular, and they like to be liked and like to be popular and like that kind of relationship, and so it can be tough. I've seen, certainly one task of any leader is dealing with employee performance issues. And I think this style in particular sometimes has real difficulty with that because it requires the tough conversation and there's not a comfort level with it. Let's do the last one. How about the idea style? What's the strength, contribution of the idea-oriented leader?
I would say they help to set a vision and mission for people.
Yes, yep. That vision, that big picture, rallying people around that, definitely. Anything else?
Innovation.
Innovation, yeah.
Yeah, like always thinking about new ways
Yeah.
to do things.
Yeah, definitely. And every organization needs that. You need fresh perspectives. You need, a new look at things. You need new ideas. What's the downside of this style?
You need bigger details.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Anything else?
Have a hard time collaborating.
They can. Yeah, definitely. Yep. And they can be seen sometimes as out of touch. That the energy and the value comes from ideas and brainstorming, not from the implementation of them. That's for somebody else to take care of. And so, people can look at that and say they're out there. They don't realize what it takes to get something done. So as we're going through this, I hope that you're seeing a couple things. Number one, that there's a good sort of check and balance here. So, for example, if I'm the action leader, I want to have people around me who pay attention to process, who are concerned about the team building and relationship aspect, who can bring creativity and fresh blood to the group. And so there's a nice complement that each can provide to the rest. And in my experience, and I do a lot of work around team building, best teams have all four of these styles represented. It can cause conflict because we're not seeing eye to eye on things. We're looking at it from a different point of view. But it really can provide the well-rounded team. And I actually use this for team building. When I go into a department or a company where I don't know the individuals, I do a few assessments. So this is one I often do. And we literally put it up on the board or on a flip chart and look and see where is the group. And it can be very interesting. I had one group where there was a lot of infighting going on. And we put it up. There were 9 people in the group. 8 of them, interestingly enough, were in the people box. And one of them was in the action box. And so they said, well, if we're all people-oriented, why do we hate each other? And the problem was because they were all under stress. So all those negative characteristics, the emotions and the being thin-skinned and moody and sensitive were coming out, and that's why they weren't getting along.
Just a question. This is about preference, right?
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily mean you're good at any of it. Your preference might be
True.
people, and you might be awful at it.
True. You're absolutely
so
right.
is there like then another layer down where, okay, that's your preference, but
How
are you any
skilled
good
are
at
you?
Yeah.
Not as part of this assessment,
Right,
but yeah, I think that would be a good next step to say this is what we like, but are we good at it? Right, exactly. And in this case, that group was not really good at it. It was probably less that they were good at it. They were wonderful with their customers, which was very interesting. So they were able to get it together and provide wonderful customer service, which is a box 3 skill, a people skill. But when it came to each other, because of they were under a lot of stress to produce new and to make some changes and whatnot, that's why all those negative qualities came out. Yeah. So sometimes it's not so much skill, it's the situation we're in, sort of rises to the top, all of those negative behaviors. So just, we'll just have you think about this, but, well, actually, let's do it real quickly. So in a leader, what is it about each style that you would admire? So if you had an action leader, how many of you have ever worked for an action leader? Anything about that style that you admired?
Well, my boss now is actually really going over it. So that's another way. And he thinks about the big picture, and he's always trying to like motivate the team to like stay on top.
Yeah. Sounds like he's got probably a couple other skills going on there, because the big picture, could be an idea orientation, and the motivating the team could be people. So you may have a nice balance.
So he's just always
all
like,
of them.
come on, let's
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Don't sit on your toes.
Right,
You just
yeah,
gotta
yeah.
keep moving.
Keeps that energy up, that drive up.
Yeah, my boss now definitely has a lot of energy. He'll be up at 4 in the morning and work till 9 at night, and like just never stops.
Yeah. And as long as someone in that role doesn't have that same expectation of everyone else, it can work. And I've seen it the opposite way, where they've got that drive for themselves and they push everybody else to the limit, and that's when it becomes difficult.
Reporting. When I first started in my previous career, they wanted numbers. Where were we? Budget, where were we this
Yeah.
time last year, that kind of thing. I was so concerned with customer service.
Yep.
How are my participants doing? I could rattle off certain fundraising numbers, but in terms of the bigger picture,
Yep.
I got tripped up all the time, and that's what they want. That's
Right.
what
Absolutely. It is. They're very, very goal oriented, very results oriented, very bottom line oriented. And I guess a downside to that is, you can get to a goal, but equally important is how you get there. And it's interesting, a lot of companies went through changing their performance management systems and went to a very goal-focused program, and a lot of them are changing it back, because what they found is that people would do anything to achieve that goal, even if it meant trampling over their coworkers, acting unethically. And so there's got to be a balance there between between the goal itself, getting there, the what and the how. How are we going to get there? And sometimes the action person doesn't see the how. I'll just go back to that. What about, anyone ever work for a process leader, process boss? Any upsides that you saw to that? What were the?
Well, I worked for
What'd you
an
hire?
action leader, and then when he left, the process leader.
Oh boy, that's a big change.
So it was really different.
Yeah.
Way of leading.
Not bad.
But it was very thorough. Meetings very well organized.
Yeah.
It was, wanting to get stuff done, but it just wasn't like, where are we?
Right, exactly, yeah. Real different styles. I'm sure there was a big adjustment they had to go through. How about anybody work for a people style boss? Anything you admired about him or her?
It's just like really open with communication.
Yep.
Like she stops by my cube several times a day to just sort of check in,
Yep.
which is, I really like.
Yeah, great, excellent. And how about idea? What did you admire about that style?
Just, creativity aspect.
Yeah.
Not saying that every idea they had was
Right.
groundbreaking, but I mean just the fact that it was constant. I mean,
Exactly.
Not every idea stuck, but the fact that they were always putting them out there,
Yeah.
and you kind of rely on those type of leaders, because you kind of feel like they're guiding you.
Right,
Or
exactly.
actually maybe not guiding you, but at least kind of starting to point you in
Yeah.
the direction, because they're getting the ball rolling with thoughts.
Absolutely. I also worked for an idea leader at one point in my career, and one of the members of the department referred to him as never having met an idea he didn't like. And it could be frustrating at times until we realize that he didn't expect that every idea was going to be implemented. I think if you're not in that style and you're suddenly around someone who's constantly coming up with new ideas, you think, oh my goodness, how can he think we're going to get all this done? And you begin to realize that that's not the expectation for a lot of that style, that it's, again, that the satisfaction and the energy comes around generating the new and the novel, but there's not an expectation that all of those are going to be implemented. Once we understood that, it became a lot easier. I'm going to skip this next question because we kind of talked about it when we talked about the dark side of each style. I want to go to this slide, and that is, so how can we use this model in leadership, in communication, and interacting with others? So I think there are 4 keys. Number 1, understanding the potential problems that can occur when different communication styles interact. We saw that earlier in the Jane and Joe slide, that if you've got someone, for example, whose action style and wants to go, 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 and let's just pick a plan of action and do it, and you've got someone else who's very methodical and wants to look at every possibility and every option, there's the potential for some real communication breakdown there. Second key, knowing how to cope when these problems do arise. Third key, which I think is the most important, and that is learning how to adjust your own dominant style to different people in different situations. And then finally, using the 4 styles positively. So, the goal here is not to manipulate others. The goal is to try to achieve effective communication. But again, I think the key is our own flexibility. There are numerous studies that have been done of, quote, successful people. And what most of these studies have found is that one of the qualities that people who rise to the top, that are successful in life and in their careers, have what we call flexible interpersonal skills. And that is they're able to adjust and adapt their style to the people and the situations that they need. And it doesn't mean changing who you are. Personally, I was delivering this workshop, this goes back a few years, it was to a group of college and university deans, actually. And when I got to the point of talking about this third key and adjusting, one of the deans, happened to be a woman, stood up from her seat, kind of gripped her chair, veins kind of bulging out of her neck, and exact quote, she said, "I feel like you're telling us we have to change our essence." Keep your essence, don't want it. It's not it at all, it's about behavior. It's not about it's about delivery. It's really about delivery. If you ever take a course on presentation skills, the emphasis on knowing your audience and delivering your material in a way that your audience can hear it. That's exactly what we're talking about here. You are you. But it's talking about how you deliver your message, and if you can change that up and be flexible, depending on who your audience is, you'll be a lot more successful at getting that message heard than if you get stuck in your own preferred way of communicating and speaking. So I have a little activity for you. I'm going to ask you to get into small groups. It's like up to 7:15, is it? I'm going to put you in 3 or 4 small groups, and here's the exercise. We'll go through the instructions first, and we'll get you into a couple of groups. So I want you to pretend that you are coaches, advisors, mentors, consultants. You can call yourselves whatever you like. And you have a manager who comes to you with a problem. And so you're going to be advising this manager who's going to be interacting with an employee who has a different communication style than his or her own. What suggestions or tips would you give the manager for effectively communicating with the employee and making this a successful interaction? Once we get you into small groups, I'll bring a worksheet around so you can jot down your ideas on that. But these are the scenarios you're going to work on. So there are 4. So in the first scenario, the manager you're advising is action and the employee is process. What would you tell that action manager to do to make that an effective meeting, conversation, communication? So let's do a couple of them, one or two tips here, just so we're on the same page. So what would you tell that manager to do to communicate effectively with his process-oriented employee?
Make sure that he stays task-oriented and communicating.
Absolutely, that's a great first tip. So make sure that you stay on task, that you stay task-oriented in the conversation. What else? Let's do one more. What other tip would you give that manager?
Use a deadline, because it's the manager's action, right?
Correct.
An agreed upon timeline, I should say, or scheduled deadlines. That way, they both know.
Yep.
By the end of this week, we got to do this. So.
Absolutely. And the process person will like that because they like structure.
Yeah.
And so part of that structure is knowing what my time frame is within that. So you get the idea. So the second scenario is going to be process manager communicating with a people employee, then a people manager to an idea employee, and finally the last one, an idea manager to an action employee. So let's just do it by row, and I'll ask you to join these 4 folks. We'll have you 3 work together. We'll have, what else we got a big row here. Let's have you 4 work together, 2 in the back. Let's have you 3, and let's have you 4. So I'll come around and I'll hand out one worksheet, just jot down. I'm only looking for 2 or 3 tips per scenario, so this will go fairly quickly, about 10 minutes. You can use the 2 that we already came up with. That works. There's a worksheet for you guys.
Look at it, but bad because we use that right. I don't want to look bad. We do that one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yes, I think.
Any questions about what I'm
Yeah,
asking you to
they
do?
want
Any confusion or good? All right, well, sit. Any questions?
The lens is really good. Yeah, and then stay on task. Like, task-oriented communication. Oh, yeah. Like set goals. Yeah. Definitely.
Measurable goals.
Like that happy medium.
Percentages and stuff, yeah. All right, think that's good enough?
Yeah.
So, like a place.
So,
You are. That's fine.
yes. So people, I guess you want to,
How would you deal with it? And people.
I want to involve your, get you involved in the decision.
Yeah, it'd be forcing them to be like involved with the people, because I'm process oriented also, and like, yeah, I'd rather just be like doing my own thing, working, making sure I have everything right. And
So involved, I guess involvement's key, right? Make sure you're involved with the ride, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Like maybe, or like find a way to involve the other person that like doesn't make you feel trapped. Like find a way to just be able to communicate with your teammates so that you guys are, you know, connecting in.
This person responds people just needs some intelligence to understand it themselves, right? Because people concentrate on communication more than goals. That's why they're leadership explain it.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, like just to like maybe they should make an effort for the person to present the results they get now. I think not only the results of communication, but also the results related to their goal.
Like encourage the people person to like set goals and like,
Yeah.
is that what you mean?
Yeah.
I think the key thing there is that involvement, right? So involvement, making sure they're, you're making sure that you.
Evan.
Evan?
Yeah.
So if Evan's in the process, he wants to kind of be off on his own, you know, look at the data, here's employees, he might decide the fact that you're involved in it, or that you know, you're being shown or not being part of it.
Self-development and
Yeah, bother you as a people.
new ways and focus on development. Any person can feel comfortable.
So just giving your input on things, right?
Yeah, maybe like,
It's like kind of common ground.
yeah, like involve the people person in decisions and goal setting, I would say. Like it just involve.
And probably like, you know, a lot of scheduled one-on-one.
Well, that's what I figure. A lot of schedule to keep me.
Face to face, or I guess you're the you want to keep giving them feedback, right?
Yeah.
At least involved in it.
Yeah, no, that's really good because then you're like, the people person is getting their like interaction, but the process person is like, yeah.
So it's like someone who can things outside of the box.
I'm like scheduling or if you feel like more comfortable. Oh well, but that's yeah.
I mean, if you probably want to allow some room for brainstorming, you know, some of that, you know,
But like rein them in.
yeah, you gotta, but, you know, give them a little bit of a, you know, pontification
I think we just do
in some moments. I guess you don't want to, you don't want to pigeonhole or paint it in the same way. Give a little bit of freedom, right?
Yeah, also that's what they told me. Examples
Yeah, I mean, they were trying to be creative, right?
To be creative, but still something creative.
Yeah, I think the time is key for
Give them that 5 minutes to kind of go off.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like, I mean, like, set, like, you know, have that person, like, recognize the need for the analytics, or, like, let them find their own way. Yeah. Like, give them I would say maybe like while you're letting them like brainstorm and things like encouraging them to like pick one rather than like go for all of these and like go through it and help them think through the idea in terms of like how to actually implement it.
Like creative. Sometimes they just
It's almost like what you're saying, yeah, almost kind of force them, okay, that was a great idea, now I'm going to do it. A lot of times it's easiest to kind of be on the ether, good ideas, the devil's the details, right? So, say, okay, now you got to go on the whole ride, you got to make sure this gets done in case. So encourage involvement in the whole process.
if there was an idea.
Well, I think the only problem that might happen is like the action design is gonna like hear something and hear these ideas and think, okay, let's get this done.
Yeah, they're gonna go after everything.
So when like the boss is like so like I mean both of them like the boss and me just sort of like be able to verbalize the difference between these are great ideas and this is what we're gonna do. Like this is what we're gonna pick to put into action so that action doesn't get overwhelmed.
Yeah. Sometimes we just oh, there is an idea and we can do it, but maybe it's just
yeah.
That's not gonna work for the one.
I guess it'd be under the assumption that the idea person's like taking time to like think of all these new things. You know, the action person's like, well, we have an idea, we just need to, you know, choose one and act on it instead of keep going. So I guess it would be to figure out a way to make sure you can get some of these ideas like going.
I just need a flow.
Yeah.
They need to start with such process, like, we're in this very kind of range right now. They have a set process. Okay, as we're moving forward, this is real. We're not just talking about things, we're actually not.
See, my last boss was an action idea person, and as a process person, it killed me because it's like, he's like, all right, I have all these great ideas, and then we try to start one project and then not finish it, and then
he's off the next shiny object.
Yeah, the next
About
object.
4 more minutes, everybody. 4 minutes.
Like even when you start, you don't have a plan, so it's kind of like we're just winging it all the time.
So he's establishing an agreement process to go through something that they can have.
Yeah.
And maybe just to get if you're the idea person, if you recognize that, you know, I say, listen, everything I say doesn't mean you have to go out and do it. Like, almost going to say, right now I'm just spitballing, so please don't take notes, just talk about it. Yeah, constantly reminding them, no, I don't do that. Or, you know, like at the end of it, just kind of circle back. Yeah, circle back after the conversation. Like, we talked about
maybe ask people from other communication files, so do they think about it?
You all done?
What style are you guys?
You folks all done? It's still working. You all done?
yeah, we're done.
Yeah. I was actually the very close to idea.
Okay.
Heavily processed.
Really?
Another minute or so.
Fuzzy people, yeah.
People, they're pretty strong. So we all
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, I've done things like, not this exact, but things like, very big reading.
Were you expecting to be processed?
Yeah.
You said you're hardcore in the training process.
Well, I have a 17 on process, and my next highest is a 9.
Oh wow.
So,
That's pretty competitive.
yeah.
Were you like, you're so weird. That's good.
I don't know, it's just like
All right, everybody, in the interest of time, I'm going to stop you here. So I'd like to hear some of your suggestions. So we started off with 2 for the action style. Any group have any, or excuse me, action to process. Does any group have any that you would add for that first scenario, action to process? We had stay on task. I forgot what the other one was.
Timeline, deadline.
Time deadline, exactly, thank you. Other suggestions for that leader? Anybody else?
We came up with, we just said you have, it's kind of like having a timeline, but making sure that person has measurable goals.
Yes,
So that they,
yes,
something they know they did a good job. because it's
absolutely,
a percentage or it's, there's something they can go back with numbers.
exactly.
and
Plus that style likes to know where they're going. You know, it's kind of, wanting the framework, wanting to understand, they're the people that want the agenda at the beginning of a meeting or a course. I think that helps too, having those measurable goals, lets them know where they're going. How about the second one, process to people? What were some of the ideas you had for that scenario? What advice would you give?
The process boss should try to involve the people person in all decisions and give a lot of feedback, but also ask for feedback. So
Yes.
the people person feels comfortable.
Yes, absolutely, because the people person wants to participate, wants that input, wants to feel part of the team. Others?
being objective and thinking about their feelings and recognition.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as we're going through this, I hope you're again realizing that this is really requiring the leader to step way outside of their comfort zone. Does the process person want to think about feelings? No. But if he wants to make a connection with an employee who does have that style, it requires that kind of adjustment. How about the third one, people to idea? Any suggestions?
Well, the boss should allow the idea person to find creative ways to reach the goal,
Yes.
but they should start at the start, like set goals together and
Yes.
agree on something.
Yes, but allowing some room for creativity is important. Did you have one also? Yeah.
We also said understanding the person going in and like it doesn't include understanding the climate of the person.
Yes, exactly. Yep. There's actually an activity that works in the rare situation where you have this exact combination. One activity that works really well is brainstorming, for two reasons. For the idea person, it's a chance to generate new ideas, to generate creativity. For the people person, one of the great things about brainstorming is it's a very participative activity. And so everyone in the room gets a chance to be a part of that, and that's appealing to the people style. So that, or if you have that combination, that can work. How about the last one? Some people say this is the toughest combo, idea to action, because they're so radically different.
Instead of doing more dialogue, please just sit down and come in and talk through some things, because the action-oriented person is going to then extract the details they would need
Yes.
to formulate their plan to put into action.
Okay, great. I like that. Yep. Anything else?
Be very clear on your vision,
Yes.
your idea, so that they're taking it where you want it to go.
Absolutely. In fact, I would expand that a little bit and say, put your best idea forward first, because the action person doesn't want to hear 100 ideas. They want to grab onto one, and as you said, get it done, have a plan of attack. So float your best one to the top, and that's the one you share.
And also it's important to measure whether their ideas are realistic and the goals are realistic. Because
Yes.
sometimes they just want to take anything that seems
interest
Yeah.
in creating for your meeting.
Yeah, exactly. So again, picking that idea that's maybe in alignment with the goals, the overall goals, is going to appeal to the action person.
There is one at least with process boss and an idea person, is there?
No.
Would that probably be the most visible
That
combination
could.
of all of you?
It could.
And you get your employees out in the ether.
Yes,
just,
exactly.
Spitballing on the crazy
Yeah,
things. And you're just
yeah,
like,
because the process person, for every idea that the idea person's generating, the process person's mind's going to, how do we implement this? How do we implement this?
I mean, I'm sure there's like, they're seeing things like the guy in people's mind, just numbers everywhere, and then
Right.
the idea person just killing them with.
Exactly. And it's interesting you bring that up. In doing a team building with a department, I had that exact scenario, that the boss, the department head, was idea oriented, and one of the managers that reported to him was very process. And he would come into her office and he would say, I've got this great idea, and would start spinning it out. And exactly what you said, her mind's immediately going to, you gotta be kidding me, how are we gonna do this? And they ended up butting heads. And he would walk away feeling she is so inflexible. She's not willing to consider new ideas. She would walk away thinking, this guy is clueless. He has no idea what it's going to take to implement these ideas. So we actually went through, with the department, went through this activity of communication styles, and he found out where everyone was and where he was. He made one small tweak, and that is he would go into her office and say, I have this idea. He would share it, and he would say, you know what, take a couple days to think about it. Let's get together in 2 days and talk about it. Think about whether it's doable, any ideas you have for how we can implement it, and he'd leave. Instead of staying there and waiting for her to say, what a great idea. And it made a huge difference. So it gave her the breathing room she needed to think about it, play with it, look at it, look at the pros and cons. Was he a little impatient? Yeah, he would have loved for her to, click her heels together and say, fantastic idea, let's do it. But he knew that he was going to get a more productive conversation if he gave her that time. And you know what? More often than not, when they got together 2 days later, she'd have a whole plan laid out. Here's how we're going to get it done. So that's what I'm talking about. There's small changes in how you approach people, how you deliver. Let me hand out, I've got a list of tips for how to adjust to all 4 of the styles. And you covered some of them. There are a couple there that we didn't talk about that I'll highlight. So for the action, I think we talked about several of these. One we didn't, which I think is really important, is be brief. Talk in bullet points. The action person doesn't want a whole long explanation, monologue. They just want you to get to the point. Communicating with a process person, again, I think we talked about a number of these. And again, critical, don't rush the process person. Give them time literally to process the idea, the plan, your suggestion, whatever that may be. The first bullet we did not talk about for the people style, and I think that is very important, and that is, unlike the action person who wants to get right to business, the people style is all about building rapport. And so start with a little bit of rapport building, a little bit of small talk. Don't get to business immediately. Take time to sort of build that bond and that rapport, and that can make a huge difference. And then communicating with an idea person, I don't think we mentioned patience. Again, sometimes you may have to reel them in a little bit because they're going off on 8 million different tangents, but allowing a little bit of time for that creativity to flow can be really critical. So again, these are small things. These are not fundamentally changing, doing a personality transplant. This is all about knowing your audience and making those small behavioral changes that can make a huge difference in how you work with others. I've seen it work time and time again. It just requires knowing where you are, knowing where you start from, self-awareness, and then being willing to, again, step outside of that comfort zone and say, you know what, this isn't going to work with Denise. I'm going to be meeting with her in an hour. I've got to do something a little bit different to ensure that we have a good conversation. So that's what it's all about. So let me share a couple more slides and then we'll see what questions you have. So my message is don't get stuck. Don't get stuck by only using your preferred style. And you know what? This is not the be-all and end-all. There are many good style assessments out there. I don't care which one you pay attention to. The main thing is to get some self-awareness. You know, use one of the models and say, okay, this is where I am, this is where the people around me are, and these are, again, small changes I can make. And you don't need, if you work with people every single day, if you're a leader, you don't need your team to take this assessment to know where they are. Just by observing and hearing what they communicate about what's important to them, it would be very easy to slot people into these boxes. So again, if you like this one, by all means use it. There are many others out there, but the main goal is to use a model and to figure out where you are and where other people are and how you can adjust. If you don't do that, you're going to miss opportunities to effectively lead and communicate with others. I mentioned this earlier, the research studies tell us that flexible interpersonal skills is an important quality and skill for people who are successful. They adapt their style to suit each person and each situation that they meet. And bottom line is, it's about strengthening rapport with people, and certainly in a leadership role, that's so critical. If you're a leader, you're only a leader if people are willing to follow you. And they're willing to follow you when they feel that you understand them, you support them, you can communicate effectively with them. So when you adapt to other styles, you build greater understanding, you strengthen your rapport with other people, and the bottom line is you increase your ability to lead and communicate effectively. By the way, it works in your personal lives too. I've had many people say, I'm taking this home to my spouse. And having him or her take it, maybe we could figure out some of our communication issues here, so that can work. So I'll leave these up here. I don't have a handout for you on this, but some people have found this useful in doing a little bit of a self-analysis about how you can use this. So some questions to think about. What are the positive aspects of my communication style? How have these positive aspects benefited me in leading or communicating with others? How can I strengthen these positive aspects or add more? And then kind of go into the other side of the balance sheet. What aspects of my communication style have hindered my effectiveness in leading or communicating with others? And then finally, what can I do to minimize or eliminate these hindrances? So it's, kind of looking at it, as Dr. Phillips says, is it working for you? What you're doing right now in terms of your style, how much of it is working for you, how much of it is working against you, maybe it's working well with some people and not so much with others. What do I need to change or tweak to ensure that I'm being equally effective with everyone I lead or everyone I communicate